Welcome back to Land Matters, the podcast of the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. I'm your host, Anthony Flint. Well, in this dizzying political season, it's easy to lose sight of how the mayors of big cities are doing the day in and day out work of governing, but indeed they are. And on this show, we'll hear from Tishaura Jones, mayor of St. Louis, a place trying mightily to rebound from a now distant industrial past. Tishaura Jones was sworn in as the 47th mayor and the first Black female mayor in the city's history on April 20th, 2021. That, of course, was the time of the COVID pandemic and an ongoing racial reckoning following the murder of George Floyd, eerily similar to the case of Michael Brown, killed in nearby Ferguson 10 years ago. Mayor Jones has concentrated on economic development and quality of life and the modernizing of municipal services, which she hopes will make city government easier to navigate and engage in. There are many projects to talk about that fill in the vast gaps and vacant parcels that followed massive manufacturing and population loss in St. Louis. And very recently, the city has been enjoying some welcome windfalls, including federal funding from ARPA and the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as a $250 million settlement with the NFL for the loss of the Rams to LA. Described as a history maker on a mission, Jones served 2 terms in the Missouri House of Representatives, was selected as the first African-American woman in Missouri history to hold the position of Assistant Minority Floor Leader, and also is the first African-American woman to serve as Treasurer of St. Louis. She holds a bachelor degree in finance from Hampton University and a master's degree in health administration from the St. Louis University School of Public Health, and is a graduate of the Executives in State and Local Government program at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. And she is the latest municipal chief executive to have the spotlight in the Lincoln Institute's Mayor's Desk series, interviews with urban leaders from around the world, talking about those on-the-ground issues like housing, transportation, and land use. We spoke at the end of the summer. Mayor Tishaura Jones, thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you for having me.
For those rooting for a rebound for legacy cities, St. Louis has been a bit of a roller coaster from the renaissance of Washington Avenue to the post-COVID downtown so-called doom loop and continuing population loss. What's your assessment of the city's strengths and weaknesses at this point?
Well, I would say that in the past 3 years, we have been laser focused on doing the non-sexy work to lay the foundation for future growth. And that is the work within City Hall to make City Hall easier to navigate, easier to participate in, and easier to understand. And then also adding different pieces that are looking to the future. So we just opened an Office of New Americans because we realized that part of population growth is going to come from our refugees and other international citizens who choose St. Louis as a home who, may be fleeing violent situations. So we've accepted refugees from Afghanistan, from Ukraine, and back in the 90s, we accepted refugees from Bosnia. So we have the largest Bosnian population outside of Europe. So knowing those things and knowing those pieces of the puzzle, also looking at our severe population loss of African Americans, we are laying the groundwork to make sure that St. Louis is equitable and a city that everybody can participate in, and being focused on rebuilding areas and investing in areas that haven't seen investment in decades.
Speaking of investment, we've been looking at the Inflation Reduction Act and how it is pumping billions for clean energy manufacturing in economically distressed areas, including St. Louis. Do you consider the region to be part of a potential new battery belt? And can this clean energy transition be a savior?
I would say partly. We haven't seen a lot of companies investing in exploring that technology. We only have one company that has taken advantage of the money from the Inflation Reduction Act to expand its business. Where we see the most growth is in defense and geospatial, as well as advanced manufacturing. So those are the sort of areas and industries that we have focused our attention on. We have the largest SCIF outside of Northern Virginia, actually one of the only SCIFs in the Midwest. So advertising that along with the Department of Defense is building its new National Geospatial Agency, the first of its kind that's actually built in North St. Louis, which is a predominantly Black neighborhood, and also working with the neighbors that surround that facility to make sure that the additional development that happens around the facility happens with community input.
This is just an aside. Can you tell us what SCIF, is that a district?
Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. It is a highly confidential workspace, a highly secure workspace.
Oh, okay.
Companies like an Amazon or other defense-related companies would locate there. And so they're basically behind like closed doors. You can't get in unless you work there. It's highly confidential, high security areas, but for companies that have very secure platforms.
Tell me more about the investments that are going on with the backdrop that federal funding, you also have the $250 million NFL settlement from the loss of the Rams. There seems to be really an unprecedented amount of funding and even an approaching deadline for spending it. So how are you managing that? And maybe you could pick out a tangible success story. Tell us about the Monarch at MLK, for example.
So we received almost $500 million in ARPA funding, which is really large for a city our size, and have made intentional decisions to put that money out in communities that haven't seen investment in decades. So for St. Louis, that's North St. Louis, which is 99% African American, and a part of Southeast St. Louis, which is about 60 to 65% African American. Both of those areas of our city have high levels of poverty, high levels of vacancy, and also high levels of crime. So we are making intentional investments in those areas, bringing back business and industry, building new homes. There are places where a mortgage hasn't been generated in some neighborhoods for 10 or 15 years. We play that whole appraisal game, which is a chicken and egg theory. If you can't build or you can't get a loan unless it appraises out, but there are no comps for an appraisal. So we're trying to rebuild a market in order to build more new market rate and affordable homes. And the Monarch at MLK was an old electrical plant that sat vacant for decades. We are turning that into a world-class workforce development hub, co-located with companies that will actually be producing their products on site. Our Office of Violence Prevention will go there. Our Workforce Development Agency, which is called SLATE, St. Louis Agency for Training and Employment. Our Economic Empowerment Center will also go there, which is going to help entrepreneurs either start or grow their businesses, as well as our Land Reutilization Authority, our land bank. They have a lot of equipment that they use to maintain our vacant lots, which we have about 7,000 vacant lots that we are currently maintaining. So their equipment as well as their offices are going to go there. So we're co-locating essential services in community so people don't always have to come downtown to City Hall. You know, a lot of people don't like coming to City Hall. So we hope that this facility is going to be a hub of activity. And we also own 15 acres around it. So we're going to build up around it as well with a daycare center and other housing and other amenities.
For all the physical planning and placemaking that is part of the mayor's job, what are the key elements of addressing violent crime, which understandably is on the minds of so many residents?
Well, the year before I came into office, which was a pandemic year, we had 263 homicides. And as of the end of 2023, that number's down to 158. That's a 40% decrease. Crime is also decreasing in other categories besides homicides, carjackings, aggravated assaults, robberies. And it's because of several things that we put in place. It's not just one thing. So we started by opening a new office of violence prevention where we work with community organizations because people who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. So we provide grants and technical assistance to organizations, community organizations on the ground who are doing this violence prevention work, employing trusted messengers, taking care of mental health, substance abuse, And we also started a cops and clinicians program where we pair an officer with a mental health professional to be deployed to certain calls, because we're trying to deploy the right professional to the right call. Just that program alone has saved us thousands of man hours and millions of dollars, because we've diverted people from emergency rooms, we've diverted people from jail and entering the criminal justice system. We also have embedded in our 911 center a behavioral health professional so people can speak to someone in real time when they're in mental health crisis. And we also have a non-police response that helps with, again, substance abuse, mental health, and our unhoused population. And also, for the first time in our city's history, I hired a police chief from outside of the city in our entire 260-year history. He's been in several cities, Wilmington, Delaware, Chicago, and started his career in New York. And he applies business practices to policing with a methodology called CompStat that looks at the data on a day-to-day basis and deploys our resources, which are finite when it comes to the police department, and deploys our resources based on what the data is telling us. In his first year, full year being police chief, homicides were reduced 20%. We're not quite where we want to be, but we're definitely moving in the right direction with all of these pieces working together.
I want to turn to infrastructure, which plays a role in sort of the overall vibe of the city, I guess. Have you seen any difference in the results of the infrastructure plan, I understand, from 2 years ago, which I read included some small but important things like sidewalk repair, lighting, and trimming weeds and all like that?
So yes, I sit as the chair of our local metropolitan planning organization, or the East-West Gateway of governments, of local governments. And so most of our infrastructure dollars flow through there for our various transportation projects. But we also, as a city, set aside almost $50 million to repave our major thoroughfares. And we currently have about $300 million in projects going on, whether it's repaving our major thoroughfares or our side streets. Great Rivers Greenway is building the Brick Line Greenway. Think of Atlanta or Denver, where they have those greenways that are bike and ped paths. So we will be expanding ours to connect our major parks. So in about 5 years, you'll be able to ride your bike from the Arch all the way to Forest Park, and then a park on the south side called Tower Grove Park, to a park on the north side called Fairground Park. And it'll be connected through a series of bike and ped pathways. And we're hoping to also start construction on expanding transit, taking advantage of the money that's available through the Department of Transportation, expanding our light rail. That's also called the Green Line. And then we're also going to apply for funding to redo our airport. So in about 5 to 7 years, St. Louis is going to have a new airport, a new transit line, new bike and ped pathways, and a whole host of infrastructure projects will be almost finished or at completion.
How can a city like St. Louis contribute to the effort to combat climate change, while at the same time needing to build resilience to manage extreme heat, for example?
Well, today, as we are recording this interview, it's about 100 degrees outside, which is normal for August in St. Louis, but, is not normal for those who have respiratory problems. We also received a multi-million-dollar grant from the federal government to plant more trees to make sure that certain neighborhoods are not heat islands. And so just with the disinvestment that happened in certain portions of our community, also there weren't trees replanted as well. So we're going to be planting more trees, hopefully cooling down the city as we do that. We're also part of the Bloomberg Sustainable Cities Initiative, where we will be employing about 3 to 4 people for the next 3 to 4 years to identify other sustainability projects and how those intersect with economic justice.
A lot of the mayors that we've interviewed have talked a little bit about the stress and heavy weight of the job. And so I'd like to ask you, just on kind of a personal level, how do you manage all of these challenges day to day?
The answer I usually give is that I rely on 3 things: Jesus, my Peloton, and bourbon, and not always in that order. But I think I have a 4th weight that's on my shoulders, which is I'm the single mom of the most adorable and probably the tallest 17-year-old Durlova. He is about 6'8", and he's a junior in high school. And so I also have to juggle that in addition to being mayor. I would say I do it all by the grace of God. I feel like